rise, I'd like to call the meeting to order. January 23rd, Board of Education meeting. There we go. We can start with public audience, but there's not seeing none. I will move on to our board administration communications. Dylan, at your last meeting, I can say it now because we're very happy to have you. You've been a wonderful addition to our board, and you've brought us a lot of good knowledge and insight. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much. Well, first off, Squadron Line students will be performing in orchestra and band concerts tomorrow night, so I hope you all can make it out to that concert. Because of the half-day schedule last week, Tooten Hills staff the Tooten Hills staff helps out students prepare peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for the Project Outreach program that the school works with twice a month. Latimer hosted a fun-packed family ice skating night at Simsbury Farms, where the skates were free, and it was about an hour long, and it had a really good turnout. They will also be hosting the critically acclaimed storytelling and sketch group, the Story Pirates, on January 26th. Central School students are preparing for the annual talent show auditions that will be taking place in early February. And the 5th grade is hosting a YMCA pool party, which the proceeds will be going to the Camp Jewel trip. At the middle school, students are decorating connectors to celebrate Black History Month. The school will also be hosting its Neon Night on Friday. That will include a DJ and a photo booth. And winter intramurals have been very well attended. The high school students just finished their the first official midterm week, which was consisted of half days, and the high school students are also preparing a theater production of Mary Poppins, and it was included on Fox 61, which was very awesome to see. And tickets are available online. I know for sure on Facebook, but I am sure that you can get them at different locations as well. I'm also very thankful to have this opportunity. Thank you so much for having me on the board for the past couple months. I learned a lot about myself as a public speaker and about the process that the board goes through to make different decisions. And I got to meet a lot of fantastic people along the way. So thank you.
Thank you, Dylan.
You're very welcome.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Nothing, thank you. I'd just like to report that next week I will be in DC for, on behalf of NSBA, we have a board director meeting, and we have the 3rd annual Equity Symposium. So we have about 600 board members from around the country attending that, and then we will be having our Advocacy Institute, where we talk about elected, engaged, and empowerment on the Hill. So we will be having Cokie Roberts from NPR will be one of our featured speakers, our guest political speakers. And so we'll be doing a lot of advocacy efforts and lobbying, and then we will spend the 2 days with appointments. As of now, keep your fingers crossed, we have appointments with all of our congressional delegation. So things may change. So hopefully we'll be able to see all of them in person, which doesn't always happen in DC. But right now we do have those standing appointments Monday and Tuesday with them. So we will be on the Hill and advocating on behalf of public education and board members from around the country, and of course all of you. So again, it will be a very riveting year, as we say, on the Hill and in DC. And once we return from that, we will immediately start getting involved, or we're already involved with our own delegation in Connecticut, because the legislature convenes in Connecticut on February 4th. So, and on February 15th, we have our legislative breakfast, our KB Area 2 legislative breakfast. So hopefully you can make that. We have many superintendents. Matt, you'll be there.
Yep.
And we will have many legislators there and board members. So in particular, this is going to be the last legislative breakfast around the state. So those legislators that were unable to make other legislative breakfasts around the state, and board members will be convening at the Capitol with us. So we will have a lot to discuss at that time. So that's
Thank you very much. Busy. Sounds good.
All set, thanks.
Sue?
I was just going to give you all an update. We had a curriculum committee meeting on Friday. Got a nice update on the math program and the rollout and how that's all going, and the feedback is really very positive. Got to see the surveys that were given to the parents at the Math and Focus night at Latimer Lane, and really such a positive response. I'm like counting, like you wait for the other shoe to drop, but I don't think there's one dropping. So teachers seem to be doing well with it from all the feedback we got from Erin, and it was really refreshing to hear. So a good step in the right direction. And then what am I forgetting? What
Vision
else
of
did
a
we talk about?
graduate.
Yes, Vision of a Graduate, which you're going to hear more about tonight. But very interesting conversation around that as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Mrs. Lemke?
Great. Just as a reminder, the Special Ed Parent Teacher Organization, SEPTO, is sponsoring their next event tomorrow night. 7 p.m. at Henry James. We'll have 2 guest speakers, one from the Department of Developmental Services, DDS, and one from Doors Level Up, and they do a lot with employability of our students with disabilities through the Bureau of Rehabilitative Services. So that program, again, starts at 7 tomorrow night in the Henry James Caf.
Just to let the Personnel and Negotiations Committee members know that we are gearing up for nurses negotiations for the spring, and we'll do a first meeting of that probably in February with all of you to set goals.
I have nothing tonight. Thank you.
Nothing tonight.
Wonderful. Moving on. We can look at the minutes of the January 9th meeting. Does anyone have anything they want to say, add to them? Thoughts? I'd entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Moving on to personnel.
Yes, 2 announced retirements. We get that calendar turning to a new year, and sometimes that's a time when people come forward and announce that they have been considering retirement. We have 2 for your motions tonight. The first is Virginia Bowes, Ginger Bowes, who is a primary teacher at Tooten Hill School for the past 17 years. Just when you think of a primary school teacher, it's all about her with her just great skills and kindness. Currently in 3rd grade, but she's done several grades at Tooten Hill School, 17 years and retiring this June 30th. And then Dennis Meralda, who has been an elementary Spanish teacher for us, impacted a lot of students over the years. When you're an elementary world language teacher, you travel to all the schools on a cart with a bag over your shoulder. When it's Senor Meralda, that includes a guitar too. 22 years, and this is a second career for Dennis, and in some ways a third career because he also had a brief military career but has done 30 years in the reserves. So I want to thank him for his service to our country and to the Simsbury Public Schools and congratulate him on his retirement at the end of this year. So the motion is there for your
Thank
consideration.
you very much. Anyone have anything they want to say? Questions? I'd entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the retirements as listed.
Excellent.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Wonderful. Thank you for your service to our schools. Greatly appreciate all their energies to our students. Moving on to a vision of a graduate.
All right, so I am going to kick this one off, and we probably have just, it's pretty brief, 4 or 5 slides, but it's an initial conversation, a topic that we are very excited as a leadership group. And our leadership team has been talking about this. Aaron and I have actually been working in the background on this for the better part of a year, but it's really a concept that's very much tied to our continuous improvement planning. It's around really ensuring that your district vision and mission are as relevant and current as it can be to the changing times that we're all faced with, right? So to kick this off, we have a little quick video, and then I'm going to share one slide and give this to Aaron to talk through. But this is Tony Wagner, who's one of the leaders at the forefront of this work nationwide.
Human history, the primary focus of education has been acquiring more content knowledge. And the only way to get it is through the teacher, right? You don't have to do that anymore. Today, content is ubiquitous. It's free. It's on every internet-connected device. And it's growing exponentially and changing constantly. The world simply no longer cares how much our kids know. What the world cares about is what they can do with what they know, which is a completely different education problem.
When we were growing up, parents and teachers talked about work ethic, that you really had to want to work hard. But it turns out in the 21st century, work ethic isn't good enough. You can't just intend to work hard. You actually have to know what to do next yourself. You have to be motivated and you have to have knowledge about what is the next step I ought to be taking.
If we can compete with other countries, it's got to be in producing citizens capable of innovative thinking. Not citizens capable of industrial production, not citizens capable of assembling iPads. We're going to lose if that's what we think we're producing. The old blue-collar industrial model of education is already gone. We're already living in its wake.
So what is everyone looking for? They're looking for people who can do critical thinking and problem solving. ... in order to get the leadership. Critical thinking and problem solving are really table stakes today. They assume you've got that. What everyone's really looking for are people who can not only do their job, but invent, reinvent, and re-engineer their job while they're doing it.
A recent study by the RAND Corporation found out that among the state tests that are used for accountability, only about 2% of the items on the math tests measure higher order thinking skills. 98% of the items are, can you apply an algorithm and do the procedure? The problem with that is that quite often people who can identify a particular problem format and crank out an answer, or find and guess an answer from a list of 5, which schools spend a lot of time on, cannot reason their way through a mathematical application in the real world.
We have to prepare students to be resilient, to be thinkers, to be collaborators, to be communicators. We have to prepare them in such a different way.
I think there's a sharp trade-off between what can be tested easily on a large scale and what's important in life. Think of a different universe where you're asking kids to invent a science experiment, write a creative essay, come up with an interesting historical perspective on an event they care about. Far more important challenges for a kid, far more aligned with what they need to do in the real world when they graduate. Much harder to test and very hard to say you got a 731 on this experiment and somebody else got a 627 on the experiment. So that's the existential trade-off we face in education.
Creativity cannot be taught, but it can be killed. Because to me, creativity and entrepreneurship and in the spirit to innovate, they all are human nature. We can enhance it, we can make it better, but more importantly, a lot of times we discourage by forcing people to do what other people think is right, to force people to find answers, not ask questions, to force people to shoot for answers very efficiently, not asking to explore.
There's some really big questions here is, what should we be teaching? Who are our major stakeholders? So getting that consensus among all of the players, the parents, the teachers, the business community, the politicians, this is what we want our end product to look like. This is what we want the students coming out prepared to do, not just to know. Until you get that aligned, getting tough doesn't matter, because you're getting tough on what?
I would argue that beyond the morality of this issue, it's simply a matter of self-interest for all of us. Because if we don't train and teach and really support children from all these backgrounds, they become our responsibility or our fear. So it's about fear. Because we have to teach them about what we consider most important in our society. This is not about something that would be nice to do. This is about the very essence of our future. This is about who we become as a nation.
So, big ideas that I think fit very nicely into how we have always operated and kind of operationalized with the continuous improvement process. So if you take a look at this slide and think about our cycle and how we operate, what we're excited about is next year we work into the time frame where we would come together as a board several times over the course of the year with our administrative groups and really look at our next iteration of Board of Education goals. Look at where we've been, look at where we want to go, and establish a whole new series of goals that then play into our school-based programs and even our grade level action plans. At that time, we normally take a look at our district vision and our core beliefs as well. So it times up perfectly, I believe, for us to engage in a process this year, pull a pretty large, significant committee together that Aaron will talk about in a few minutes. Board members, students, we get input and we really start to think about those attributes, those competencies that we want our students to have when they leave our system, K-12. So a vision of a graduate is much more kid-centered language, which is great, but it's also adult-centered language. That when you identify these things like problem solving, creativity, whatever they may be, then we need to talk about how they live in our school district. So we're really excited to move forward with the initial phases of this. I mean, this is long-range work, but it's right in alignment with where we should be and where we're going. So with that, I will kick it over to Aaron for a little more background on kind of the nuts and bolts of what it means.
Just a quick question for
Sure.
context. When is the last time we did this?
So we did this 5 years ago.
Okay, so it's a 5-year.
It's a 5-year process. Yep.
So the question is, we always ask ourselves why. What 5 years ago, we stepped into the process and we created what we currently are using. Now we're looking at the future. We've been talking about the 21st century skills for a long time, back in the late 90s, and we're now 18 years into the 21st century. So we really have to begin thinking about it. But I want you to look at this slide for a few minutes. And this is a real reason as to why we have to think differently about how we're educating our students around these skills such as collaboration, communication, creativity, problem solving. So our current kindergartners are the class of 2030. Over the next 5 years that the Board of Ed goals will be in place, those kids will be coming in and graduating in 2031, 32, 33, 34, 35. So when you think about that timeline, when they exit Simsbury High School, they'll be entering post-high school, universities, colleges, workforce. They might not, if they go to college, it could take 4 to 6 years to complete. They're going to be entering the workforce in 2040, in the 2040s, and not even getting to the mid of their careers.
You guys still going to be with me up
I
there?
know, it sounds old for a high school.
So do we have
We're not
to
talking
stay on
about our
board
own
until then?
mortality right now.
No, we just set up to work and leave.
But if you think about their mid-career stages in their lives, it'll be in the 2060s. And so we know now, when we think about the workforces and the changes in work environments that are going on, as they said in the video, things are right at our fingertips. We can get content. But we do need to know that kids can read and write, do math, and understand science and social studies. But we also have to create this bedrock, this foundation for students so that they can work collectively and really be, as they've said, confident that they know what the next step is, that they can work independently, but they can work as a team. So this is why we need to do this, and we believe that this will build upon work that we currently do. The high school, under Neil's leadership, have been creating 21st century skills, a couple of iterations of it for NEASC over the last few years. It is just the opportune time to celebrate what the high school's been working on and us to just take it to another level. So we've been talking with our administrative council, working with them. This is a very interesting book. It was recommended to us. The second gentleman in the video was Ken Kay, and he is the director, CEO of Ed Leadership 21. And he recommended at one of our meetings that we've been going to, he recommended this book. And the first 4 chapters really gives you a sense of what is the need for education to look like as we continue to move forward. This is actually my book. This amount of the book really goes into what they call the 6 C's, and talking about communication and collaboration and confidence and content. So we gave a copy of this to all of our administrators and asked them to read the first 4 chapters and come to our administrative council meeting and talk about, soft skills, hard skills. And so what we also wanted to do, and what we really, Matt and I have been talking about this a lot, is building upon our successes over time. So we asked our administrative council to, as an elementary group, middle school group, and high school group, to really think about the kinds of things that we've been working hard on over the last 10 or 15 years to help move kids forward into this global society that is ever changing. I mean, these weren't around like they are now 15, 20 years ago. I mean, things are just changing rapidly. So these are some of the examples that we think that are continuing to move kids and give them the kind of experiences in the Simsbury Public Schools that will prepare them for life after their experience here. So the learning clusters, the STEM lab at the high school is really one of the pictures in the video looks like the STEM lab when you look at it. Our AP research and AP seminar course that we put in place is sort of the epitome of what it means to have kids engage in their own research and really working independently but collectively with their peers at very, very high levels. What we've done as a district, just putting that professional learning opportunity together, PLCs, professional learning communities for teachers. Our teaching standards, we felt really confident when we wrote those back in 2011. Those teaching standards were done. And more recently, we've asked teachers to go out and watch each other teach, to really think about what's going on in classrooms so that they can come back together and talk about it. And a lot of work in the district around the growth mindset. So we're really excited about this work. So there's 8 of us that have gone to a statewide conference that CAPS has been providing. And part of the work that we've been doing with Ken Kay as a partner in this work is to create some of our own, what we think could be 21st century skills or those competencies that we believe all kids should have to help support their content areas. So as you can see, this is clearly an example. We actually had every administrator at Administrative Council do their own, and I'm actually in the midst of trying to collaborate on, and see what people said. So we're going to try to come up with more of what our people are thinking about. But academic mindset, innovation, creativity. This was a slide that I actually was able to show the Board of Ed Curriculum Committee last Friday. Initiative and self-direction, collaboration, communication, and personal responsibility and citizenship. So again, this is just an example. This kind of work is going on across the country. We're not the first to step into this. There are districts around us that have already done this, maybe in the past 2, 3, 5 years ago. And this is really an opportune time, as Matt said, we've been talking about this, really a time as you begin thinking about the new Board of Ed 5-year goals, this is going to lay the foundation for that. So the timeline of what we're thinking about is, working with our administrative council, bringing the district leadership together on March 1st and run them through a very similar exercise of the understanding and the reason and rationales behind this work. From that, pulling together about 35 educators from across the district, because we do believe that these skills need to start in kindergarten, preschool, kindergarten as they go through, because certainly a kindergartner can be innovative, as can a 6th grader, as can a high school student. And we have to ensure that we're finding ways to incorporate this across. So put a team of educators together, continue to work on it in AC, bring back messages to the faculty, the full faculty, because we just can't have everybody involved, but we need representatives from the elementary, middle, and high school. And then ultimately come back to you in June with a presentation of what we as a district believe are the competencies and the indicators that support those competencies to help you as you think about the new Board of Ed 5-year goals.
Sounds great. Anyone have any questions?
No, I was just saying, I said this last week at the curriculum committee. I am just, this is a great exercise, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think the issues that you've hit on are the issues that clearly that are being talked about in my own job, in my own workplace, collaboration, innovation. You've really hit on something, and this is, talk about preparing these students for not just college, but for post-college. It's a great exercise, and I commend you for it. And Jeff, what I didn't remember is that we do want to include a lot of stakeholders in this, and let people really understand what we're doing, not only the educators, but community members and students. We'd like to really talk with current students and graduate students to try to make sure that we're on the right track. Because I think one of the things that was sort of the aha at Administrative Council is that as educators, we went through school ourselves as young children and adolescent. We went on to college and became certified in education, and came out of that and came right back into the educational world. So a lot of us educators don't know what the workforce looks like, and we hear more and more about it, of how the environments are changing and the expectations are changing for students. Of course, they want smart, energetic students, but they also want to ensure that they have a variety of skills that will help them be successful in the workforce.
I think one of the things that Simsbury's always been so innovative about is teaching kids to like to learn. And I mean, and this just takes it to the next step. But you've got to teach someone how to learn, not necessarily what to learn, but how to learn. And that's always been our philosophy. So to take this to this step is great.
I think it'll really help to validate as well as leverage needed areas that we need to focus on. So I think that's what we're most most.
And I've got
excited
daughters who are in startup companies, and let me tell you, they change things every month. They have meetings, and they like, okay, we've been doing it this way, but it's time to try it this way, and they change it immediately, and everyone has to roll with it and keep. And that's the future.
So my favorite standard, which didn't make the final list in my group today, believe it or not, but was flexibility and adaptability. And but it'll be interesting as the
It's
the
popping up
conversation
in everybody's that I'm going through right now.
How important those skills are at this time.
And my friend and my daughters. I'm sorry, I'm digressing, but my daughters have a friend who is working in the same industry and has a lot of difficulty. Just doesn't understand. Like, once I get to know, they're making me change how I do that, and just is having a
Becomes
very difficult time. And
part
she's
of
22
your-
years
right,
old, and she's
right.
very frustrated. It's very interesting.
That's unfortunately not uncommon.
No, I think that's
Because
more normal.
I think we've all seen that with 20-somethings in our offices, where that is a stretch for them to actually be able to roll with changing or varying responsibilities that might be outside what they expect.
Expectations, yeah, that's a very good point.
You have to be mindful of that as you're doing this, because you
Very
have,
exciting.
it's a job.
It's a job, that's right.
It's a job. It's not fun.
Couple of questions. The
Always.
book, is that, who was reading that? Administrative Council. So should board members be reading this? If we're going to be participating in this process, should we be? I actually have about 7 copies right now that I would like to have give. them. I didn't want to just put it
I
on the
would be
table.
very happy to.
Get to work.
I can get them to you before the meeting's Yeah, over. I just think it's important. I think it would be worth it.
I would like to read it.
It's written by 2 scientists that
It is
really,
put
they're not
in a very
educators, they're
practical-
scientists,
into a very
so to speak.
practical way.
And If
layman's speak.
you need to give us the same assignment, I think, read the first 4 chapters. That'd be and, great.
Yeah.
We ought to be working our way on a
Absolutely.
parallel path. You'll leave tonight with a copy in your hand.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm
And,
sorry.
and homework.
And homework,
homework.
4 chapters.
Yeah, a couple things.
What's our timeline?
From the video, there were a lot of words starting with a C.
Yes.
The collaboration word, the creativity word, 1 or 2 others, but one that was mentioned there, but which I just want to suggest we dwell on a little bit, is critical thinking, because critical thinking is something I try to teach myself at the university level, but I just think it might be useful if you could refresh our understanding of what critical thinking actually is, and maybe make some comment on the role that critical thinking might play in this process.
So I think that, as you think critically about a particular issue, you need to understand the pros, the cons, the issues that come along with it, be able to problem solve when you get information back, be able to, see Neil's point of view, my point of view, and think critically about what it is that we're attempting to either attempt to solve or to think about. But there's more to it than that. And I think as we come back, critical thinking is like showing up on everybody's. Critical thinking and problem solving is so important for people to be able to do. on the, just in the split second time zone or, overtime to be able to do that. So when we come back with each one of the competencies, we want to ensure that we have indicators that describe exactly what you're talking about. So
Well,
more to come on that.
That would be good, because the term critical thinking it's thrown around a lot
Broad.
in higher education in particular, and certainly at this level as well. But it's a term that most people don't really understand.
Right.
It's a little bit of a jargon kind of a term.
Yes, it is.
And I think it would be good for us to take that
Very
term
good point.
and make it very, very clear what it means.
And I think every one of these, and we've found this, the group of 8 that have been working on this so far, and now the administrative council, is that, for example, collaboration, and Sue can certainly talk about an experience that she had in a conversation,
Yeah.
is that collaboration is like one of those words that gets put out all the time about how to collaborate. And part of this, and somewhere they talked about teamwork. And so in the conversation that Sue had at her table, she left the table, at least what she indicated to me, thinking, I'm not sold on collaboration now. I'm sold more on teamwork.
Right. Right, it's the concept of that overuse. That it's thrown out there, the term is generalized, and it falls into a larger bucket. Well, does it really? Like, what exactly do we mean? And how do we operationally define exactly what these competencies are? Because if we're clear about them, our teachers will be clear about them, our community will be clear about them, and so will our students.
I think that's a very, very good comment. So now there are a couple of these terms we really need
yeah.
to be sure we
Yes.
understand. Just 2 other things. The list of initiatives that was shown, I don't know what the slide number was, but the one that says K through 12 initiatives and district initiatives, just as a matter of interest to us as board members and to the public that might be listening to this, that's a pretty impressive list of bullet points there in the left-hand column. And the question is, how many of those initiatives were in place 5 or 6 years ago? In other words, are most of these initiatives the product of a planning process that we did 5 years ago, or not?
They are an outgrowth of some of that, but learning clusters have been in place for quite some time now.
Okay.
As we think about that, with our school character ed programs, Connections has always been something that we've
So
really
some of
feel
these have been
strongly.
around for
So
quite a
some
while.
of them
Half.
have, but some of
Half
them
and
are
half?
new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
And
they're all
this
being
is-
worked on, but they're all
yeah.
evolving.
So in the last 5 years, we've added to the list.
Absolutely.
In a significant
Oh, yes.
way, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
good.
Oh, yes.
The
And
last,
we've added to each of the bullets.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the last thing, and this, I'm sorry, this might not be a very good question, but I'm going to raise it anyway. At the end of this timeline, there's going to be a presentation to the board. Could you just clarify a little bit what the deliverable actually is? What is going to actually be delivered
So if
at the end
you,
of this timeline?
So a document that would have the one Aaron went to that had the 8
to the-
kind of core
Like
competencies.
that.
So say critical thinking is one,
Uh-huh.
and underneath it, we will define what the attributes of that critical thinking are. So it's a guide. It's a guiding document. Would be the deliverable.
Okay. And
Similar to it, it's like a district vision document,
Mhm.
but in kind of a new format.
Okay. But we won't be at the point yet where the deliverable would be, these are the programs
Oh no,
that we're going to develop in
Oh,
order
gosh.
to.
no.
This is just the beginning.
This is right. So this will guide our work, our goals. This is more theory based,
Okay.
and we will use it to do exactly that in the future.
Because what we know is what we decide on and present to you
Mm-hmm.
in June, and as we go forward with your development of the 5-year goals, we have 2018-19 to work with our faculty to really help them understand the work going ahead, because they come into play in the 2019-20 school year.
Thank you.
I have a couple other things I wanted to ask.
Sure.
Go right ahead.
One sort of a comment in general. I hope that the outcome of the work that you're doing and that we'll work with you on is sort of a balanced program, balanced in a couple of ways. One is, I think from the years that I've been involved with the Board of Ed, it seems sometimes that the way we, and it's not intended, but the way the program sort of results, it becomes focused on the top performing kids in the school. And I think it has to be, and we've had this conversation repeatedly, and I may sound like a broken record, but I think we got to make sure this is balanced across all the sort of academic levels of performance. I'm probably not saying that correctly, but
No,
it
understood.
can't be aimed at the kids who are just really good at STEM, you know?
Yeah.
It's got to be aimed at everybody. It's got to include everybody in an even way, in a balanced way. The second area from a balance standpoint is, and I think anybody who's in the private sector today has this problem. We hire mostly master's degree graduates in different things, and most of our clients do the same. And one of our problems with new graduates is, they all want to collaborate and innovate and so on, but quite frankly, we need production. And most of them don't have enough skill or knowledge of the business to collaborate or innovate or anything. We need them to get to work. And if they work for 2 or 3 years in our environment, then they'll be in a position of being knowledgeable enough that they can maybe become part of a collaborative, innovative team. But a lot of them come in and they want to meet, they want to sit with their friends and talk things through. And the reality is,
Gotta get some work done.
we and our clients, we've got a lot of work that has to get done. And maybe accounts payable work, it's not all going to be in the creative kind of classes. And I think we have to balance
Manage the expectations.
Yeah, we have to balance the expectations about what the work world's going to be like when they get up. The last thing is, I hope that we would consider, as part of our vision of the graduates, that not everybody is going to go to college anymore. I think that's changing rapidly. And we had a young man who worked for us as an intern, a great kid, and but could not handle the college environment. Went to a group called Dev Mountain, which is a group of it's a company. They have, I think, 4 offices around the nation, and they do a crash course of software writing, coding, basically. And it's like a 3 or 4 month long program. They work all day long. They actually live in the school, and a lot of them work all night on stuff. They can work almost any hour. But virtually all of them get jobs as in software writing. The placement is 99.9% when they graduate. But it's a great fit for this particular young man, who's just not college bound. He's very bright, and he's got a lot of skills. He's moving so fast. The only thing that can keep up with him, I think, is Dev Mountain. So he's going to come out of that, I think, and do really well, get a great job at a high income, and probably be one of the next sort of guys that makes a whole lot of money. But it's not a college path. And I think you're going to see more and more programs like that emerge. Really talented kids who are going to focus for a specific period of time, get really high skills in a very narrow area, and that's great for them. That's what they like to do, and they're going to be very successful doing it. So I hope that the vision of the graduate isn't exclusively, well, you're on a college path.
No,
You've got
absolutely.
there are an increasing number of other paths.
One of the key pieces we've talked about as a leadership team is this vision will really help to guide a relook at how we provide internship opportunities for students. I think there are so many pathways that we can develop in a different way to start to provide some real world experience for kids, to stimulate excitement in an area, get some early real work experience, and
help make good choices.
Help make the choices, similar like we've done with the learning clusters, but you do it out in the private sector a little bit.
That's a great program. I think balancing their expectations is really important, because I know from experience with in our shop and our clients that some of these kids are very disappointed when they realize that they've graduated college and they're not going to be part of collaborative, creative teams and sitting around in a Google-type atmosphere. They're going to be in a cubicle processing stuff for a while, because that's what has to get done. And,
very good.
Well, and we talked about it at curriculum that, one of the things we all kind of agreed was a valuable piece was to make sure we are talking to our kind of, maybe the kids who are finishing sophomore year in college and the kids who have just graduated, to find out, did they have what they needed? What was missing? What might be added to it? And it's just a valuable perspective that I think we shouldn't overlook.
Which is excellent that the title is such, because I do think that the title of your goals on this is exactly what we're looking for. Dylan, do you have anything you want to add?
So from personal experience, I'm currently enrolled in, I took AP seminar, and I'm one of 6 students in the AP research course right now, and I couldn't speak It's such a fantastic course. It's one of the most difficult courses I've ever taken, but the workload is very small, and I think I might use it. It might be the most useful course for me outside of high school.
Could you tell us a little bit more about this course?
So each student is told to do some research on any topic. You create a thesis early in the fall, and then you have to find what we call a gap, where there hasn't been any research done, or any academic research at least. And for example, I'm analyzing the expanded Common Core, and I'm going to do analysis of how different schools utilize it. And right now we're working on our methods of how we're going to be designing our research process. But
So you're working in a group, Dylan?
no, this is my personal paper.
Okay.
But then we have students working on therapeutic horse riding and the effects on children. And so really you get to focus on your interest, and especially if I'm going to college for something that I enjoy, having experience in that area already is.
What are you going to college for?
Right now I'm thinking communications, but I'm also considering education. And
do you know where you're going?
No, not yet. No, but I have a couple options.
You're on your way.
Yeah. But again, I absolutely love the course, and I'm 100% sure more students are going to be taking it.
Just as we looked at those courses when I was exiting the principalship of Simsbury High School, the AP seminar and AP research, I think it's really a response from the College Board to some of the criticism that they had gotten of these courses that were just content, that were stressing kids out, and said we really have to design. So if we're talking about the kind of learning in these kind of future discussions, we've got to design courses that don't look like that. And AP Seminar and AP Research was really the College Board's first attempt to say we need to change, and it was very refreshing.
I just to make a comment then, I was not aware of this course, but I love what I just heard, because it's part of the whole critical thinking process, the whole idea of gathering data, knowing how to gather data, then taking that data and putting it into some kind of a form that can be analyzed, and look at it and draw conclusions. That's what, basically, in a nutshell, is what critical thinking is. And yet, I'm, again, going to my own experience, which is not in a business environment, but it's in an educational environment. The single biggest weakness in my classrooms are that my students are not good at doing research, at gathering data and then interpreting it. I pretty much have to do it for them. And to the extent, and so even in this example from the group of 8, we've got these hats coming up on this slide. If I may, I just would like humbly throw out a suggestion that this whole idea of developing research capabilities might be something to think about in this program, because it's essential, especially because there's so much information available these days. So I don't know, it's just an idea that comes out of this.
Excellent.
Comment, yeah.
I have a couple comments on that. First of all, this is precisely what we're going to be talking about at a larger discussion in DC. When we are there, we get basically into a little more strategic, and especially when we do have the Department of Education. Unfortunately, Secretary DeVos will not be there, but when we have Department of Education speaking with us, these are aligned. We will be in breakout groups. These are exactly the questions that we have from around the country. Are the visions of graduates, you know, the student that's a kindergartner now, or student that is just born this year, graduating in 2030, and our mantra this year is really Vision 2030 for the student that is born this year. So this is precisely things that we are going to be bringing to the table at the federal level with Department of Education, and then more importantly when we're really on the Hill with a lot of our legislators, congressional team on that, because these are some areas, especially in terms of career, the Perkins Career and Placement. A lot of these bills that are coming forward again that we're advocating for education for all from around the country are very crucial to what is going on. So I'm glad that we're having this discussion on this. My next question is, so Neil, let me ask you, when you were exiting as your principalship and designing this for the AP students, and I'm glad to hear this, Dylan, that this is something research-based that you're doing. But those students that are not in AP, how do they get the opportunity that you have? Because you happen to be in AP, but majority of the kids are not in AP. So this should be something that we should be looking at down the road to give all students the opportunity to do, as you're doing, research-based, gap, what have you, not just content.
Right.
Is this something that?
Well, I think that was a leading edge. That was certainly something that was not designed by us. It was designed by the College Board.
Understand.
And they actually started with pilots in a lot of private schools.
Right.
Where there's a lot more flexibility around curriculum, not a responsibility to Common Core necessarily. So their development happened in a number of private schools right here in Connecticut, actually, which is, we were about the first public school to get into the AP research, AP seminar and AP research. There's now a handful in Connecticut that have joined on in that course. But yeah, I think that's absolutely the growth area, is to expand it, as Mike said, beyond the top kids and say, how do you take those skills and expand them?
Absolutely. As Aaron was alluding to, I mean, in terms 2030 is not that far away when you think about it. Or 2035, but the jobs that, obviously we've heard this cliche before, that are going to be invented, that are not even invented, that are not even for today.
But I think as we know, and we've been looking at our new Math and Focus program, and I think that's what we found when we talked about both of these on Friday, is that learning opportunity, that math learning that's going on in our K-8 classrooms really lends itself to these kinds of inquiry and questioning and, teamwork and all of those kinds of things. The new generation science standards lend to that, the inquiry model and social studies. So this is our work as we've been doing and continue to expand it over the next 3 to 5 years.
Excellent. Anyone else have anything they want to add? Thank you very much. That was great. Really appreciate it. And looking forward to more on that to come. Moving on to the next point, 2018-2019 budget.
All right, so Neil is going to lead us through this presentation. It's pretty significant in that we know that personnel is the largest driver in our budget. So Neil's going to go through some enrollment information, some background on fixed costs, and really walk us through an initial conversation about how we're taking our fixed costs and what our board, or our administrative group, proposes to you to really think about in terms of how we move our fixed cost number towards that cap number that the Board of Finance gave us. I think we have a solid strategy, and I'll turn it over to Neil to walk through.
Remind us of the guidance.
It's a 1.75% increase overall in operating for both the town and the Board of Ed.
Right, so this is in the series of budget presentations that you're going to get. They obviously started in December with Matt's overview and the 3-board meeting. At our last meeting, Sue did the special education drivers, and then this would really be, in a sense, the largest one because of the significance of the personnel costs. You do have a hard copy of this presentation in your folder. This is where we stuff those budget binders. So if you brought your budget binder with you, there is a personnel tab that this one can go into.
Staffing and enrollment tab.
Staffing and enrollment, thank you. Staffing and enrollment. Burke makes the books.
Learn your tabs.
So, and obviously in terms of a district context, what you're going to see throughout this presentation is it is enrollment kind of compared to staffing. And it's not only historical data in a really quick way, but also the projections for next year. So if you look at the district context to start, obviously we all know it's been a period of declining enrollment. From here are the years I chose, and I'll tell you why I chose them. 2008-9 basically represented near the very high point of enrollment, but it was the high point in terms of staffing. The number of FTE we had in the 2008-9 school year, which not coincidentally was right before the national budget crisis in the midst of the 2008 election. 2012-13 was kind of a logical midpoint from where we are now to show where some enrollment decline had happened, and in future slides, subsequent staffing, compare it to this year, and then the projection for next year. So in each of the sets of slides you're going to see, it's going to be those exact years that we're going to parallel through the presentation. So here you can see, obviously, the theme that you've seen throughout our enrollment projections. The biggest chunk by far has been at the elementary level, a more significant chunk at the middle school, and really not yet in terms of significant decrease at the high school. So now taking the enrollment, which is now at the end of this slide, and comparing it to staffing from where we were. And you can see we've organized this into certified staff reductions, non-certified staff reductions, administrative reductions, and then a total. So in the first 5-year chunk, if you will, not as many certified staffing reductions as non-certified. There was a major push as we put in the reading intervention program to eliminate paraprofessionals at that time. They've kind of come back in a little bit, but where the significant savings have been in the last 5 years is a reduction of, as you can see there, about 18 FTE on the certified side, and those in fact, are more expensive personnel when you're looking at how budgets get constructed. So certainly one of the things that you want to see here is that while it's not equal to what enrollment reduction is, there have been responsible reductions. And so when we are in the public meetings, people need to know that we are down 50 FTE from where we were. If you could go back just a second on that one, Sue. I do want to note that in last year's budget, so you can see in the last 5 years, the decline in the staffing total, the next to last column, is about 14 FTE, but 12.5 came in last year's budget. So when we had our state crisis, it's another time where you can see we went down real FTE last year in terms of a 12.5 student reduction. At the same time, during this 10-year period, you've responsibly reallocated dollars to really important projects, including our reading intervention program. In Aaron's presentation, we just talked about the expansion of the learning clusters, a revamping of an elective program at Simsbury High School that stands second to none, a full-day kindergarten, and I'll show the impact of that when we get to the elementary. Certainly the coaching work that we've done, and last year's block schedule implementation. On the other side, piggybacking off of Sue's presentation from 2 weeks ago, the additions that we've made to special education in the same time period. Special education teachers primarily at the high school level that have been added, paraprofessionals, kind of a reset on our Ready, Set, Go program, bringing back a very skilled facilitator, and both mental health supports and preschool supports. So in both areas of regular ed and special ed, you've put additions in at the same time that you've reduced 50 personnel, and it's pretty significant. So before I get to the numbers at each level, wanted to orient you a little bit to a different process that we used this year, knowing that coming out of last year's difficulties with the state budget, that we had to reframe the conversation with our principals so that this didn't just become about rolling forward the status quo and then saying, what do we have to cut? And being much more proactive with our principals on that process. So in October and November, what we did from the personnel office is issue to the principals lists of all certified personnel in their building and all non-certified personnel in their building, and ask them to make a 5% reduction exercise. We wanted to create a simulation that if the worst scenario came in and we had to reduce 5% of staff, what would you do? Knowing that that would be an almost impossible target to reach. But what it did was create conversations around priorities and ideas that they had that kind of forced things onto the table that maybe they didn't want to talk about, and allowed us to reframe a conversation as we got into budget priorities to say, well, this is what you talked about when it was an exercise. When we really said, what as you look at your operation, what would be most impactful and least impactful in terms of looking at staffing. And I would point specifically to the last bullet. A lot of that focus, the other thing we gave them was the list of retirements. And sometimes we get questions about why do we have this policy around people giving us notice around retirements? And the fact of the matter is that helps us plan responsibly when we know retirements are coming. And allows us to look at those personnel in particular. And you're going to see that theme carry out as we get into the decisions that we're presenting tonight.
Just to put
Sure.
a number on that number, that 5%, and that's pretty hefty. What does that, roughly, what would that translate to in terms of a percentage reduction in our overall operating expenses?
A staffing decrease of 5%?
Yeah. I'm guessing it'd be about 4%, but I don't know if that's a good, no, just roughly, not, if personnel is 80% of our,
Teachers
of our
contract at 30
bill.
million. 3 million would be 10%,
10%, so
1.5 million would be 5%. So that's actually how we played out the exercise. If I said Henry James has got 60 teachers, cutting 10% of the teachers would be 6 teachers. If you had to eliminate 3 teachers in this school, what would it look like? And so it was a hard exercise, but a doable exercise.
Really
And
good
it
conversation.
and it really created interesting conversations. So, as we look at the elementary first, the enrollment decline over the past decade of about 533 students, and you can see that the classroom teachers are down 13 and a half teachers from 109.5 classrooms. How do you get a 0.5 classroom? Remember, we used to have half-day kindergarten. So out of that 13.5 that you're down, we added full-day kindergarten, which increased 7 teachers. So if you still had half-day kindergarten, that number would actually be 20 classroom teachers that you're down based on 533 decrease of enrollment. And so it's a pretty significant number. For next year, the number, however, won't change. And this chart shows you elementary sections. So I'll point you right to the middle of it. And it's a comparison between 2017-18 and then projected for next year. And right in the middle, you can see we had 96 classroom sections last year, and we're projecting for 96 classroom sections for next year. So obviously status quo budgeting there. You remember from my October 1st report, however, that at that 96 level, we did, for the first time in a number of years, have a number of our primary classrooms inch 1 or 2 kids above our classroom class size guidelines. On October 1st, that number of this year was 10 classes that had either gone 1 or 2 students above. The projections for next year are equally tight at that primary level. Those 4 sections represent 2 at Squadron and 2 at Latimer that the projection says would be 1 student above the class size guideline. So we'll have to monitor those extremely closely over the summer. But right now, in terms of our budgeting process, we're comfortable saying that at the same enrollment figure, 96 classroom teachers and 96 classroom teachers. In grades 3 through 6, we're actually in great shape. Those are not areas that we are worried about at all.
I'm remembering a comment that Mike had made at a meeting, I think about 6 or 8 months ago, that when we report these numbers about exceeding the guidelines, if it's just 1 or 2 students, I'm glad you pointed that out because it's not a big deal. I'm wondering about the number of classes below range.
Right.
Could you explain that a little bit?
Sure.
And is this a little bit below range or a lot below range?
It depends. You can get a cohort of, so your class size guidelines at grades 3 through 6 are 21 to 25. So let's say that we have a cohort at Tooten Hills or Terriffill, we have a lot of them that are 39 or 40 students. So, or even 37 students. Split that, you have a class of 18 and 19. They're below guidelines, but you certainly couldn't run 1 class of 37. Okay. And that's why you have so many more below than you do above, because the numbers, when you're dividing by a very small number, and in the elementary schools, that's either 2 or 3 per grade, except at Squadron where it's 4. And that's why Squadron, quite frankly, is a more efficient school in terms of class sizes. It just is.
And that clarifies that these below range numbers are also marginal as well, correct?
Yes. Okay, in terms of proposals that are coming forward, we are really happy to have some ads at the elementary level, and I certainly know that this board will recognize them because they're back from last year, and this board held on to them for the longest time until the state budget crisis really got to a point where we said we can't hold on to these new positions at the time that we're reducing 12.5 other positions. So what you will see in here, the unanimous request of our 5 elementary principals was for these 2 positions. One is an elementary math coach, and when you get to the rationale on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see it's supporting implementation of the new curriculum, and my emphasis there will be with building-based coaches. This year, with the math coaches that we have, it's a grade level philosophy. Coaches have responsibility for 2 different grade levels. And quite frankly, as Aaron implemented the work this year with the coaches, for this first year of getting a curriculum up and running, that was the right way to go. That you had to become a narrow expert. But what the principals and the math coaches have said is we would be much better, much more effective if it was more like a language arts consultant who's based in an elementary school. And what this additional math coach will allow us to do is have a math coach in each building. And that is very much the wish of the principals in year 2 of implementation of Math in Focus. So you'll see that addition. I will point out on all of these slides that you'll see this figure for an FTE of $87,501. That's a mid-level salary plus a benefits package, and it's a budgeting number. It doesn't represent real dollars. The second ad at the elementary level is a 3rd elementary social worker. Sue spoke at length about it in her presentation 2 weeks ago in terms of the impact of the work that the social workers really reinvented the work in the last few years. This would allow 1 social worker to be stationed solely at Squadron Line, and then the other 4, you would have 1 social worker for 2 schools and the other social worker for the other 2 schools. And the other thing I would add on this, while it appears on the elementary slide, we've talked with the personnel involved in supporting our students through social work. We have an open choice specialist that is an employee of the district, just works in our 7 schools here with our open choice students and families. And it's a hard job. It's spread across 7 schools, and we've increased the population of the choice program. What this will allow us to do with the social workers concentrated with a smaller caseload, they've actually said if we had a smaller caseload, we could do that intervention work with the choice students at the elementary level. And it would allow our choice specialists for the district to concentrate at the middle and high school and really make her work more impactful too. So while this is up there as an ad for the elementary, I would also call it an ad for the secondary because of that focus for our open choice specialist, who is a social worker by trade. So the reductions that we're going to talk about proposed at the elementary level, you can see all 3 of them refer to the term captured retirement. And this is in part of that planning process as we looked at folks who we knew were heading into retirement or talking about heading into retirement. Could we look at those positions in new and strategic ways and find ways to capture the dollars, quite frankly? So the first listed on there is inclusion specialist. That's very much an identifiable person in our district who's been at a number of your board meetings. It's Deb Service, who has, at every special ed presentation we've ever given, Deb is here and is a tremendous asset to our special education department. Here's what, as we've talked about this, when Deb started, she was a special education teacher, and then she became an inclusion specialist, which meant getting very disabled kids into the mainstream into mainstream classes. When Deb started that work, she was a pioneer. Getting kids into mainstream classes was a huge mountain to climb. Now, it's the way we do business. And so the idea that a position that at the time was needed to build the skills of teachers, special education teachers, but also regular education teachers, that work was really the last couple of decades of Deb's career, getting people to the point where inclusion has become a way of life in Simsbury. And so as she heads into her retirement, We believe that the rest of our special education leadership team and our practitioners have the skills to be able to do this. There also is, I will say this, there's a pseudo-administrative aspect of Deb's work that is very much a management of our paraprofessionals. And through Sue's account in contracted services, our intention would be to work part-time with Deb in her retirement to continue some of the good work that she has done in the management of our paraprofessionals. So she's interested in that. We have to get to the fine details of what that looks like, but that's a conversation that Sue and I are going to talk about. So in terms of replacing the FTE, we would move forward without it. The second one is an elementary Simsbury reading intervention program. We use our acronyms maybe too often. A SRIP reading teacher. That is obviously our elementary reading program. What I would say on this, that program was built when that enrollment total that you saw was near its height. And as we've gone from 109 classroom teachers to 96, our intervention program didn't necessarily take a similar reduction. So we had 8 teachers across the district as reading intervention teachers. We never reduced from that until last year's budget when we eliminated a half position down to 7.5. This is a retirement also that we would try to capture and look at what it looks like to do reading intervention across the district with 6.5 teachers. Could be a strain. We'll have to look at the numbers, but right now we think we can make it work looking at the caseloads, and we believe that this is a retirement that we won't necessarily need to replace. And then thirdly, we had talked earlier tonight about the retirement in elementary world language. Elementary world language is a program that is done at the 5th and 6th grade level. There have been challenges with that program in terms of curriculum, in terms of scheduling. When we talked with our principals about things that they needed to look at, there was a lot of like, maybe that's a program we really need to look at. That's something, and with the idea of a retirement, we're using this to say it's a good time to reevaluate that program and to pause and use the 2018-19 school year to look at what neighboring districts are doing, because some of them are doing very different things with elementary world language than we're doing. And to really shore up what this would do now is we would move forward with a 6th grade program for next year, talk to the teacher who would be there, shore up the 6th grade program to make it exactly what we would want it to be in terms of a curriculum rewrite and an entry plan into middle school world language, and take the year to engage Aaron and Betsy and our world language people to say, do the study of what other districts are doing. What does the research show about elementary world language? And we may be back here a next year saying, here's our proposal, not only to add this one back, but it might be even more, to kind of do elementary world language right. But we think if we just kind of fill this vacancy without that reflection, we might not be doing the right thing. So this is another retirement that for 2018-19 we would capture. And so what that shows you is the 2 additions and the 3 reductions, and again, that placeholder number that's in place.
Hey Neil, can I just ask you a quick question on the math coach? You mentioned that you'd go to a building-based math coach and that would be more efficient. I just want to make sure I'm thinking about this correctly. Is it more efficient because the principals would be essentially dealing with one coach as opposed to 6, one per grade there?
That's a big part of it.
Okay.
And that coach, you lose some of your efficiency as a coach on the grade level model because of the travel to all the schools.
Sure. Yep.
And that's a piece of what happens with their work. So as we turn to the secondary level, we'll start with Henry James. And you can see that in 2008-9, kind of that height, we were a near 70 teachers, 68 and a quarter teachers with an enrollment of 838. When you look at where it's going to be next year, you'll see that pretty significant drop from this year to next to 614, and an FTE count right around 60 for the middle school. It's a pretty significant decline in FTE over the past year.
But it's expected.
It's expected, yeah. It's based on enrollment. Yep. So what I wanted to show you is one of the challenges that the middle school is going to have, because by logic, if you say there's 40 fewer students in the middle school for next year, maybe that's a place we could capture some teaching FTE. And we might, but I'm going to kind of make an argument why that might not be the most wise thing to do. And you can see right here that right now, this year, we have 2.6 teams in our smaller 7th grade and 3 teams in our larger 8th grade. And what that's showing you is that the average class sizes are straining. We have pretty large class sizes. When you're trying to use a 21 to 25 guideline, when you're averaging 23 and a half, that's going to put some strain on the system. So there's 2 ways you could look at this for next year, and this is going to be a choice of the middle school administration which way they ultimately decide to do this. But you could leave it at 2.6 and 3 teams, which would, what this slide illustrates, that would certainly alleviate class size concerns at the 8th grade level, and leave them about where they are at the 7th grade level. And the other way to look at it, option B, is to take the same exact FTE, 5.6 teachers in each subject area, and say you could do it this way, split it evenly, 2.8 teachers, 2.8 teams in each grade. And you get a nice benefit of class size reduction if you do it that way. The key note on this at the bottom of the slide is that the next grade in is 323. So my argument is that if you cut it this year, it would be foolish because you would need to add it back in next year. That you would need at least 2.8 teams to deal with 323 students when they come in. So there's pros and cons to this argument. The class size reduction would be a pro. The con, when you don't use full teams, you do lose some of the spirit of an intact team that's got, in the middle school they think of a team as I teach 5 classes on this team with my teaching colleagues, and that breaks apart a little bit when you, so they'll have some discussion with their leaders in that building and make a decision. What the key stat for the board is the FTE won't change. One way or another, the FTE will remain the same. At the high school, in terms of staffing, you went from a high mark of 1,563 10 years ago, and the decline is not nearly as sharp if you say 155 kids over 10 years in 4 grades. That's really a pretty slow decline of student population. And you can see that from current year to next year, it's identical. It's an increase of 3 students from 1,405 to 1,408. So what I'm saying there is there's really limited potential for us to reduce at the high school. There's some places we might look, but there aren't many. And I'll say, because if you look at what has happened over the past 5 years, a reduction of only 160 students has resulted in 10 fewer FTE. That's a long-term commitment to looking at where we can reduce when people retire, when people move on, and squeezing over time to make sure that if we did not need to replace a position, we didn't do it. And it really has reduced the FTE count. So no adds at the secondary level. We're talking about 2 reductions here. The first is listed as Henry James Reading. And those of you who have been with the board for a long time will know that the reading program at Henry James was dramatically restructured. Back in the day, 7th graders got reading for half of a year. You rotated between a quarter of world language, and then you got reading, went back to world language, got reading, and students rotated through it. We stopped that when we went to an expanded world language program. At that time, we went from 3 reading teachers down to 2, and we've been holding 2 reading teachers, even though the spirit of the program changed dramatically. What those teachers do now is more of an intervention model, not unlike the SRIP model, but I would say age appropriate for the middle school and structured slightly differently. But it's an area we've been looking at for a little while, saying, perhaps that's a place when the time comes that we don't need 2 reading teachers at Henry James. In addition, the enrollment has gone from 800 to 600, and the number of students who need that service is reduced. So 2 weeks ago, I spoke to you about the retirement of Brenda Goff at the high school, who holds this certification at the high school. So the strategy here would be to look at a potential transfer of one of the teachers from the middle school to the high school and use our existing staff strategically to fill an important vacancy at the high school. Now, we've already had some preliminary talks with the department about what that might look like, and those are continuing over the next few weeks. The other FTE that we're showing you here is to be determined. There's a process that happens in February when the course enrollment numbers come in, and we can't really imagine until we get hard enrollment figures exactly which departments we would cut. We have some areas that we know we might be able to, and use that word again, squeeze a little FTE out of, but we'll wait for those enrollment numbers to come in and report back to you in the spring. So we've used the placeholder figure again of the 87,501. So it's a -2 FTE at the secondary level. You put the whole scorecard together, and this is what it looks like, that you're up 2 on the left-hand side, your priorities of an elementary math coach and an elementary social worker, and you're down 5 on the right-hand side, inclusion specialist, script teacher, elementary world language, Henry James reading, resulting in a transfer, and a to be determined secondary teacher. The strategy that I want to emphasize is the starred asterisk notion there, that 4 of these 5 are captured retirements.
That's good.
That we are not
That's real good.
looking at current employees who would be riffed or anything like that. So that part of the strategy pleases us, although we know there will be some strain in the transition away from these positions. On the non-certified side, we couldn't ask our principals to look at a reduction scenario unless we did it ourselves here at central office, and that's an exercise that we played out. One of the positions that we identified is we have a substitute caller who has worked for our district for many years. Most districts, including all of those around us, have automated that process where substitute calls happen. So we've looked at the notion of automating for almost 5 years. And when this employee talked to me last year about my retirement is coming up, I don't know an exact date, we made a commitment to look at the idea of automating. So for next year, there won't really be savings on this because it will be a transition year. But we have already made a commitment. We've done our research. We've already purchased a product that will allow us to automate not only our substitute calling service, but also an entire time card system that happens up here at central office. So a lot of time that we've been talking about this potential transition, and it's one we're ready to make, and it will yield savings, not for 2018-19, but it will definitely in the future. And then similar to the way we talked about a secondary teaching FTE, we know that each year on our non-certified staff, and on here I would include not only paraprofessionals, secretaries, custodian, maintenance, all of our non-certified employees, there's enough transition that when people retire and leave their positions, that we believe we can responsibly capture 3 vacancies that happen in the spring and summer as we look at that. We use a placeholder figure for budgeting purposes on that, and 3 FTE adds up on the slide to about $175,000 with a salary and benefits package. So last slide, here's the big finish.
Yeah. Ta-da.
You can see on the biggest driver for the budget, the personnel costs, your additions are at the top, and those are all the contracted obligations that you have. You've got settled teachers and administrator contracts and settled contracts with secretaries and paraprofessionals, which is the SFEP, and NAGE is our custodians. So all of those are settled contracts. Contracts to be settled is a placeholder in there for our nurses that I said we would be negotiating with this spring, and our unaffiliated employees. So those are your additions. I will note, important to note right now, insurance increases are not in there right now, and that'll be a big number when the superintendent's budget comes forward. Also would be the 2 additional certified requests. So you add that all up and you're about $1.6 million of adds on personnel. Here are the reductions, and there's just an extra space in this one. I don't know how it got in there. So, 4 currently known teacher retirements that we will be replacing. So we had talked about our captured retirements. These are actually additional retirements. Like tonight, we talked about at Tooten Hills, Ginger Bowes is retiring. We need another 3rd grade teacher at Tooten Hills. We're going to be replacing that position. We know we need to, but we always figure in a placeholder of a savings between typically a top of the scale salary that is retiring and a less than top scale. And our placeholder that we use on that is $25,000 per retiree. So you can see there that there's that first savings is noted on 4 replaced retirees. We are anticipating 2 additional because it's only late January, and I already am talking to some other people who are thinking about it. In fact, since this presentation was finished on Friday, we have one of those 2 has already retired, and you'll be hearing about that in 2 weeks at your next board meeting. So there's only one more that is needed to meet that figure. And in the event that we were to capture one of those retirements, the savings would be much larger. You can see here the next line on the reductions is 4 captured staff retirements. And this is a little trick I pulled that I just need you to follow. So on the slides, I used a placeholder of 87,501 because those are very identifiable people, and I didn't want to put their salaries out there for the public. When you roll them all together, that's the number that their salaries represent with benefits, and it's actually because it's a larger number when you capture a retirement. In addition to that, the unnamed secondary FTE with the placeholder figure of 87,500, and then the non-certified at about 175,000. And what you get is 850,000 in reductions, so that your total personnel drivers are a $750,000 increase. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see that represents from the overall Board of Ed budget 1.1% of an increase. When you have 1.75% to work with to meet the Board of Finance cap. So whatever else gets increased, it's got to fit in, with no changes here, would have to fit in that window between 1.1 and 1.75.
How much of that will be health, do you think?
What's that?
Insurance. How much of that do you think is going to be
The health insurance.
I'm turning to Burke and Matt on that question.
You know, we're looking right now at a preliminary increase of about $700,000, which it's a little over 1%, I guess, right? But we've mirrored other processes, Tom, when we get into the workshop and so forth, that we found efficiencies in other areas. So, but the insurance, obviously, the significant driver, and as you know, we talked about the Board of Finance potentially working with us with the non-lapsing. So those conversations are very much alive still.
Anyone have any other questions? Thank you very much.
Great
Very
report.
complete.
Thank you, Neil.
Really
Very
well
helpful.
done.
Thank you.
A very complicated subject. It was nice to, he did a great job. Thank you. Moving on to the 6-year capital improvement plan.
Okay.
I'm assuming it's Burke.
Yes, it is. Really just highlighting one updated number regarding the Henry James Phase 3 project. So we updated in this draft number 3 and shaded the estimated cost. Same scope again as we talked about last year, but with adjusted for inflation. Our architects went back to the cost estimator that they had used, and the figure that we came back with. We have a detailed page that's attached to your exhibit. It's titled A Working Draft Opinion of Probable Construction Cost. And you'll see a line there, adjusted escalation to a July 2019 construction, and that's a little over $1.1 million. So if you looked at our last draft last year during the process, that is literally the only change to this.
Thank you very much.
So we are looking at the reimbursement process, also looking closely at the assumptions there, and we'll be planning to meet with the folks in the state agencies that do the grants and just have a follow-up conversation. I just spoke with our architect today about that, in fact, and so that's what we'll be doing, just to kind of verify that nothing has changed.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Annette, thank you very much. Quarterly budget analysis.
So, give you a minute to get your exhibit. So this second quarter is remarkably level compared with last year in the pace of spending. You'll see that it's very similar in terms of revenues. We talked a bit at the board's last meeting about those. This just sort of highlights what is known so far. Where we did receive the choice monies that we budgeted for, roughly 352,000 more based on the 4% enrollment threshold, and that ultimately our ECS, while it was down from where we had started the process, was still $150,000 higher than what the town had budgeted in the mill rate exercise, because ultimately these are town revenues. We have pretty stable IDEA grants, not much change there, and as always, we don't find out about some of our final awards until later on. Probably the most variable thing would be our excess cost grant for special ed, which we anticipate we would find out next month. So that's probably the one area that could change in a magnitude of maybe 100,000 based on what we're estimating, and we just won't know until we see that first award from the state later on. So in terms of the year-over-year spending, last year we were 45.05% at the mid-year, and this year we're 45.14%. What we've tried to do in the comments about some of these changes is just highlight largely areas where we budgeted for non-lapsing and kind of looking at tracking where our potential need for that looks at this point. The first area of our major categories was pupil transportation, and you'll note that our footnote says that at this point we don't expect to use much of the 90,000 that we earmarked for non-lapsing. So that's good news this year that we've not seen the pace of spending, especially out of district transportation, go up. In regard to insurance and pension, we don't expect to use any of the 100,000 for the non-lapsing so far, based on insurance and pension. The area where we do expect to use, we had budgeted 145,000 of our non-lapsing for the out-of-district transportation and tuition. So that is the area where we are definitely seeing that we're going to need to use that. So when we talk about those drivers, this is one of those areas in our budget where we have to try to estimate, will we end this year net positive, and be able to talk about putting in some more non-lapsing for consideration for next year's budget to help offset that. So that's why we're really trying to highlight that. I don't think there's anything else that's really notable, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Anybody have any questions? Thank you very much. Great detail again. Appreciate your efforts. I would like to take this moment to introduce our incoming student representative who will be taking Dylan's place coming next meeting. Her name is Isabel Dorman. What would you like to tell us about yourself?
All right, hi everyone. I'm Isabel, and I'm super excited to be your next DOE student representative. And just a little about myself. I'm involved in many clubs at Simsbury High School. I'm on the student council. I'm a unified leader. I'm the editor of the yearbook. So I have a lot of information coming from a lot of these clubs that I hope to contribute. And I'm also planning on majoring in secondary education next year. So I'm really excited to have this seat on the board and get info on everything, and hopefully improve my public speaking skills and learn a bunch of new stuff. So
Yeah, don't see a lot of need for improvement, but thank you very much. We welcome you, and we look forward to your participation. Thank you very much. And again, Dylan, thank you again for all your hard work.
Thank you.
You were great to have. Public audience? Moving on, I would tell you that our next board meeting will be Tuesday, February 6th, right here. And I would entertain a motion
So moved.
to adjourn.
Adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.